Be seated. Shabbat shalom. In some ways, the message that I've prepared this morning, you've already lived out. Hopefully. Our parsha was, at least in the Torah portion, was restricted to some language that is very repetitive and redundant. Again, did you catch that? And did you examine it and find out that every single feast, the same exact Olah offering was offered? Yet every time, Yahweh didn't say, do it like you did it on Pesach, do it again. Right? He gave the same exact instructions over and over. I think it ends up being 5 times, if I remember right. Okay? So, attention to detail. Okay? And is it, do you think it's a coincidence? Do you think that was just an afterthought for Yahweh to throw in all these sacrifices? Do you think that he had intent and purpose behind it? Pretty sure he had a reason for it, right? We're going to talk about korbanot. That's a word you should write down. That's actually how this parsha begins. Korban means, when it's translated into English, it comes out as an offering or a sacrifice. In Hebrew, it means drawing near. Okay? And what you're seeing listed in this chapter is actually one type of korban, one of the 5 different korbanot offerings that are offered. Okay? And that's the olah. And there's a reason for that, and I was so tickled this week when I started reading the portion and thinking of what we've been studying on Monday nights, how we've been studying the Psalms of Ascent. And there's 15 Psalms of Ascent. And they were used for approaching Yerushalayim. They were used for approaching the next level in the temple. They were used for working your way from the steps outside the temple all the way through all the steps that go up to every level. There's 7 levels in the temple. And so especially during Sukkot, these 15 Psalms were recited over and over and over during those 7 days, 8 days. And it was all about approaching Yahweh. It was all about drawing near. The word korban, and again, means to draw near. There are several of us in here who are members of Houston Krav Maga. You know what that is? It's an Israeli martial art. It's a deadly form of martial art. It's purely for defense, but it is very aggressive. And the word krav comes from the same word that we're talking about here, korban. It means to bring, because in Israel, bring your enemy close and then get rid of him. That's kind of the idea behind Israeli martial art, is draw him in and then wipe him out. And do you know that's really Yahweh's attitude? Not that he likes to kill people, but you got to remember who is our enemy. Our enemy is not flesh and blood. Our enemy is Hasatan. And so you wonder why Yahweh always sends you devils to fight with? Because he wants to get rid of them. He gave us the job. Think about that. But what we're going to talk about today, and we might get back to the warfare part of this, and I kind of hope we do, but what we're going to talk about today is why did Yahweh create all of these sacrifices? Where have they gone? What's the purpose? And why has it changed? And what is it now that is our approach to Elohim? How do we approach Elohim? How do we draw near? I hope that you see more and more and more that the whole purpose behind synagogue worship is to model it after the temple, and the whole purpose of the temple was to teach people how to approach God. And that's what the offerings were for. We are unclean people, right? And in order to approach God, you have to be holy. And the only way that they could become holy in the time of the temple was to offer up offerings. That's still the only way. to approach Elohim. Only now there's one final sacrifice, one offering. But the problem is, I'm willing to bet in the congregation, both here and in the body of Messiah at large, is that we don't often go back to that one offering and remember him before we approach Yahweh. We wonder why our prayers don't get answered. The thing that I want to communicate to you today is that God absolutely wants to be near his people. He wants to be so close to us that he's inside of us. That's his desire. Do you realize that? And he created the way. Mankind didn't create the way. Mankind disrupted the way if he did anything. God created the way that you approach him. And the model of all of these sacrifices over and over, just it should show you how widely unclean human beings are. To require that much offering, that much sacrifice, that much detail, that much, saying these over and over again so that Israel would make sure that they got it right. On Pesach, don't change it. Don't change it on Shavuot. Don't change it on Rosh Hashanah. Don't change it on Yom Kippur. So he gives it 5 times. Exactly the same way. So there's this idea in God's mind of drawing people close to himself, and that's the whole purpose of the sacrificial system. The whole purpose of the Beit HaMikdash, the whole reason that Yahweh allowed King Solomon to build a house for him was to bring Israel to himself, to be close. The whole purpose of the tithe. You know I don't mention that word in this setting at all. As a matter of fact, I think this is the very first time, isn't it? The whole purpose of the tithe was to bring the worshiper close to God. It was not about money. It was about fellowshipping with Elohim in his presence in Jerusalem. It was the only place you could do it back then. It was about bringing the people together and making them united as one body, as what Israel was. Yahweh addressed Israel, the nation, as a single man. Not single in the sense that he doesn't have a spouse, but individual, as one unit, right? He addressed Israel as a unit, as one person, okay? That was the whole point of the tithe. The whole point of the Torah. The giving of the Torah was to bring people to God. Because this Torah is kind of like the boundaries. If you stretch it all the way out, and we're going to do that on Sukkot. By the way, on the 8th day of Sukkot, if you come in here, hopefully you will, our Torah will be somewhere stretched out in this room from spindle to spindle. And then we'll roll it back up. So on that day, you'll get to see every word in the Torah, if we can find enough room to roll it out. I don't know how long it is. That's a big scroll. We've got to get some tables. Okay? But so that's the boundaries of what, and think about that. Because everybody thinks about, and Messiah said this, narrow is the way to salvation. And that's true. Now if we stretch that Torah out in here, you'd think, oh my gosh, it's wide. But compared to the rest of the world, it's very narrow comparatively, isn't it? That's our boundaries. So the whole point of God giving the Torah is giving us boundaries that would guide us to him. Markers, if you will, and that's what Torah means. I've said this before. It means pointing the way. Pointing the way to what? Into the presence of Elohim. That's the purpose of our worship. We come in here, we sing first. Why do we sing first? In a Jewish synagogue, you wouldn't see what you see here in a Messianic synagogue. You wouldn't see all the rejoicing and the dancing when you go to Shabbat services. Am I right? Shelley, am I right? Where's Shelley? Am I right? Okay, so when, if you grew up in a Jewish synagogue, you didn't have, cool dudes up there rocking down on the guitar. You went in and you did the liturgy, and then you might have heard a drash, and then you went home at about 6 in the evening. Long day. But here, we come in and we sing praises. And there's a reason for that. We don't do it haphazardly. We make, my wife and I, and the few of us who started this synagogue years ago, we wrestled over that. Do we want to do it? Is that the way we really want to model this? Because, we're not trying to be a Christian church. No offense to Christian churches. We're trying to be a synagogue. Okay? But when you come to Sukkot, in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, that's what you find. Hallelujahs and rejoicing and dancing and praising. And that's all about aiming toward the Messiah. Okay, so we do that first, and then what do? We slow it down a bit. We enter into these prayers. And many people who come from a Protestant background are uncomfortable with prayers that come out of the book. But do you know that's why the Bible was written? It's one of the reasons that the Torah was written, to draw you close to God through prayer that came out of His mouth, divinely inspired prayers, to guide your tongue and your heart into His presence. And there's a pattern. Okay? And obviously for Messianic people, our pattern is, and it will always be this way as long as I'm alive and breathing and have anything to say about it, is we address the blood of Messiah first. As soon as we start prayer, that's what we're going to address first. And when our own story gets published, you're going to find it's going to be a little more lengthy as far as us ruminating over the blood of Messiah. Why? Because all of these sacrifices that we're reading about in the Torah roll up into Him. They all roll up, they point to the Messiah in some way. The sacrificial system. Why, many people wonder, why did He have animals die? What was the whole point? To bring people close to Himself. To bring people close to Himself. The point of prayer itself was to draw close to Elohim. The whole reason that Messiah, Yeshua, came was to bring the kingdom of God to earth and bring people to it. Am I being redundant? Yeah. But there's a reason. Because I think sometimes in the busy workaday life that we have, we forget that Shabbat is not the only day about being close to God. Shabbat is an elevation of what we should have been doing all week anyway. In Judaism, the concept is that as soon as you leave the Beit HaMikdash or the synagogue on Shabbat, your heart breaks because you're leaving the Sabbath behind. But immediately you begin to look forward to the next Sabbath and hope for it and prepare for it and get ready for it and long for it because it's a picture of Messiah and the peace, the rest that He's going to give the whole world. And so we go through this week after week of leaving behind the Sabbath after having rested in Yahweh and hopefully having been in His presence in an elevated manner. Now, if you went to the temple, I mentioned that there are 7 levels in the temple. Back here, you're a little bit further away. You're kind of far away. If you're at the gate and the Holy of Holies is in here, that's pretty good distance. But compared to being in Egypt, it's close, right? Okay, so in your walk, in your daily life, there are going to be times when you're not in the Holy of Holies. But there should be times when you are. And it should not only be on the Sabbath. And Messiah made it very clear, the book of Hebrews makes it very clear that the Beit HaMikdash that we're concerned about, the temple that we're concerned about is the heavenly temple. It's as real as your head. It's not a figment of imagination. It's not an ethereal sort of analogy that God's kingdom is in heaven and you can go there. That is a real thing. And that's something that I've been trying to communicate to this body and hopefully see somebody latch hold of. And many of you do. You understand this. But many of you are just kind of sitting and watching and going, I don't know about that. And what I'm trying to tell you is you have within your power the ability to walk all the way through the 7 levels of the temple and enter into the Holy of Holies. And you have that because Messiah died for you. And somebody said this morning, I don't remember who it was, we have some good conversations around here in the between hours in the morning. Somebody said this morning, there's a lot of people in our body who are just struggling. They've got stuff going on in their lives that are just, it's chaos in their lives. And they come here and they just want to breathe, and that's a fact. And that the whole life itself is a struggle. And guess what? It's always going to be. So if you're young, just brace yourself. Accept it and get, and like Isaiah, There's a verse in Isaiah, I want to say about 47, I'm not sure. I think I wrote it down, I'm not sure. But it says, I have set my face like flint in the pursuit of Elohim. I'm not sure exactly what the rest of that verse is, but it's about approaching God, being determined to do the will of God. And he makes it, he says, I'm going to give myself a hard head. And I'm going to bore through. It's kind of the idea behind it. The whole point of Yahweh sending his Ruach HaKodesh and Shavuot that we read about in the book of Acts, the whole point of that is to bring his presence. And at Shavuot, which you know is Pentecost, if you're new, that Pentecost is Shavuot. Okay? The whole point of Shavuot, of Yahweh picking that particular time to send his Ruach HaKodesh, his divine spirit, the whole point of him picking that time is because all of Israel was assembled from all places in the world. This was one of the pilgrim feasts. There's 3 pilgrim feasts, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And at this point, all of Israel was assembled. And it was time for Yahweh to send his Ruach in power. To give power to those who had believed his message. And at that time, it was only 500 people. Yeshua had been on the earth for 33 years. He had been ministering for 3.5 years, and only 500 people believed in him. 500 Jews. But in one day, because these 500 Jews, when Yeshua said, stay in Jerusalem until you receive power from on high, they obeyed him. They didn't go back to Galilee where they were from. They stayed there, they obeyed him, and 7 days later, they had to wait 7 days, and he sends his Ruach HaKodesh in power and transforms their lives, and they begin to speak the mysteries of God in every known language of the day. That was the whole purpose of the Ruach HaKodesh, is to bring people to God. What did that do when they spoke those languages? We always look at that fascinating part of the story and we just gloss over the fact that 3,000 people go, whoa! And they begin to believe in the Messiah. And it was for the purpose not of making them spiritual goofballs to go off and make a mess of things. It was for the purpose of bringing them near to Elohim, giving them power to live their lives like they did at the feasts when they were back in their normal environment. Right? Because their heart and their mind and their attitude was all elevated. You go into a Jewish synagogue, if it's a decent synagogue, and this is true of churches too, if you go into places where people are genuinely striving to worship God, they may not have it all right. We know the Jews don't have Messiah, but they're striving to worship God, and it is elevated when you go in there. But the thing that Yahweh gave us is the ability to not stop at that level, but to plunge ourselves all the way through to the Holy of Holies. And I hope that everybody in this place thinks about this next week when we begin to worship. I'm not going to stop at the outer court. I'm not going to stop at the women's court. I'm not going to stop at the altar. I'm going to go all the way through. And if you're sitting here with your eyes on your neighbor, looking at how, ooh, she's dressed funny. Look at that hair. Oh my gosh. You ain't getting there. And as long as your mind is thinking about other people and judging other people, you are not part of this process. And our desire, my desire, and the desire of Yahweh is that everybody becomes part of that process where we are bringing offerings to him. And you say, well, we don't bring offerings anymore. Yes, you do. You bring your faith in Messiah every time you approach God. You confess your faith in his blood, and that's the beginning. If you didn't do that, you probably didn't get anywhere. Because you're a sinful person just like I am, and I'm a sinful person just like you are. And without my cognitive awareness of his blood, I'm just a dirty man. Right? But if you confess that and you understand that I can move from where I was yesterday, from where I was this morning, and from where I am right now, I can get close to Elohim. And see, I believe that in the wider Christian community, there's this idea that it's about bringing God down. About pulling him down and getting him to do things for us. That's not what it is. It's about you ascending. It's about you elevating who you are, becoming more like him. Not about making him human, but about elevating. Do you know there's a place where it says that if you're arguing over who you follow religiously, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Cephas. Remember that? I follow Messiah. Period. And so when Shaul was talking about that and addressing that, he said, aren't you acting like mere men when you say that? And the connotation is people who follow Messiah should not be mere people. You're not an ordinary Joe Blow if you belong to Messiah. You are a member of a royal kingdom. You are a priest in the household of Elohim. Act like it. Think like it. Offer up the offerings that you're supposed to offer up. That's what priests do. We offer up offerings of thanksgiving. We offer our very bodies as a living sacrifice to Messiah Yeshua. That means your whole self. And one of the things, and I'm way off my notes already, so crash and burn. One of the things I had in there is that the Shema is all about that. It's about approaching Elohim. Shema Yisrael. Yahweh is your Elohim. Yahweh is Echad. There's one spot that you're looking for. You're not looking for which one is God. Right? There's one Yahweh. You're looking at him and you're going, he says, love Yahweh your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, and with all of your effort. Life is about struggle, strife, striving. And if all you're doing is striving for your next paycheck and striving for fame and fortune, striving for a new position at your job, striving for someone else to like you, striving to exalt yourself over someone else, your striving is in vain. We should all be striving to move close to God. That should be the forefront of our mind. It should be the first thing we think about when we wake up. Where are you, Elohim? I'm coming. And the thing is you know where he is. Okay, that was the first half of page 1. Turn to Philippians. When you become a believer in Messiah, a lot of people think, okay, it's done, I'm in like Flynn, there's nothing else I have to do. Okay? And in truth, the battle has just begun. Your doing and your striving and your efforts have just begun. And if you really belong to Messiah, then he is going to slap you around until you get busy. I promise you. He is not going to let you just sit there in his kingdom and just sit there. That you know what you do with stuff that just sits there? You throw it in the garbage. It gets nasty. So if you're not moving forward in your faith, something's wrong. And so I wanted to look at a few places where I believe this message is conveyed. So did you go to Philippians? Let me get there. Chapter 3. I'm going to start in verse 13. You're very familiar with this passage. It's often quoted, but I want us to look at this again. My brothers, I do not consider myself as having taken it. What's he talking about? The prize. But one thing I know, that I forget the things behind me and reach for the things that are before me. And I run straight for the goal, that I may obtain the reward of victory of the call of Elohim from on high by Yeshua HaMashiach. That's an idea of constantly pressing forward and pushing forward. What Shaul is saying here is, I'm not done, I'm not perfect, I'm still running the race. I'm still being changed from one glory to the next. I'm still being conformed into the image of the Son of God. I'm still being transformed. Okay, and that's another verse that I had down, which I believe is in Romans, Romans 12. No, hang on. Romans, yeah, it is. Romans 12 too. I think that's where it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Okay, so that's a verb, that's an action, that's a thing that you have to do in order to pursue the righteousness of Elohim. And the problem is if we sit here and we think, you know, okay, God gave me the Ruach HaKodesh, I'm perfect. There's no more for me to do. When you're thinking that way, then all of a sudden you go out and because you don't recognize that you're not perfect, and because you know people think that their perfection is achieved, then they think they can do no wrong. And what do? As believers in Messiah, they go out there and they hurt people. And maybe they are going to their prayer knees every night and saying, "Forgive me of my sins." But do you know what? If you don't see it as sin and confess it, it's never dealt with. And that's the whole point of looking into the Torah. James, Yaakov, the brother of Yeshua, said it. Someone who looks into this perfect law of liberty and turns away from it and forgets what he looked like, you know, he's like a man looking in a mirror, and it turns around and he doesn't even know what he's just saw. When you look into the Torah, I don't care how long you've been a believer in Messiah or how many doctorate degrees you have hanging on your wall, if you're looking in the Torah and not seeing what's wrong with this guy, you're not progressing. You know, and some people, I believe, and I want you to think about this. I thought about it this morning, and then Steve and I ended up having a conversation about it. It was kind of bizarre, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. The gospel of Messiah is, in one way, it's seasonal. And what do I mean by that? Yahweh puts the Torah in you, and it produces life. And then people harvest it. And guess what? When He compared His kingdom to farming over, and does everybody agree with me? Did Yeshua ever talk about farming in relationship to the kingdom? I think that's His biggest analogy, isn't it? Always. And what occurred to me this morning, I've been a believer for 49 million years, and it just dawned on me. Do you know, after a field is plowed and planted, and the plant has grown up, and the fruit has been produced, and the farmer comes in and takes the fruit off, what happens to that plant? It dies, and he plows it under, and he does the same thing again on the same land. And that's a lifelong process. And so there's a lot of people who, and I'm going to use it in the Messianic framework. I've seen this a lot, where people come into Messianic faith and they just explode with joy. And they run with it. And they begin to keep the commandments, and they tie for themselves 40 versions of the Tzitziot, and they've got them on every pair of pants they wear. You know, and then just blowing and going, becoming Messianic, and then after about a year, it's lost. I go to I hope it's not that way for you. The Torah has to be planted in you constantly, because you're not the same earth today that you were yesterday. I hope not. Are you with me? Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. So there's always going to be this effort. There's also got to be introspection, and I kind of already mentioned this with both of the verses, for looking at self, introspection, looking inside of self. And I believe there's a lot of people who do this intuitively, and I'm one of them. I'm constantly analyzing myself, probably because I had an overcritical father when I was a kid. He was constantly correcting me, constantly just, you're wrong, and I never did anything right. So I'm always looking at myself like a little nervous chihuahua. What's wrong? But in a way, it's good. Because I don't miss that part of my life. You know, I'm doing the introspection, probably a little too much. But it's a necessary part of our life. Look into our own heart and compare it to the Torah, and where can I change? And that's what I want to talk about, is, you know, people think there's this phrase, and there's this idea going around this country, and maybe the rest of the world, I cannot change and I don't have to. God made me the way I am. No, He didn't. He made you perfect. You messed it up. You were born innocent. You were taught to be ridiculous. The way that Shaul summed it up, the way that Messiah summed it up, and the way that God summed it up is if you're looking at me and loving your neighbor, you pretty much got it going on. And so the biggest area where we fail is we still look at our neighbor and run our mouth. Remember that message a couple of weeks ago? We still do things that ought not be done in the house of Elohim. And there's been a lot of different people over the last 2 to 3 days in our congregation tell me, I can't wait until we're echad. Echad means unified, one, singular. I can't wait until we are echad. I can't wait. And you know, so there's this knowledge within the body that we're not quite echad. I think this congregation has, you know, is a little bit closer to echad than I think I've ever seen it in a body. But we're not done. And it's not until everyone decides, I'm going to move close to God, I don't care about this world. I'm sick of this world. I'm sick of being a human being. Aren't you? What the message that I'm trying to get across is that we are not supposed to be ordinary people. We are not supposed to represent and resemble the world. Our behavior should not be like the guys on the Big Bang Theory. I know some of you watch it. That's not the way we should behave. It's a funny show. But that's not how we should behave. We're not supposed to be like this. We are supposed to represent Messiah Yeshua, every last one of us. And it's the circumcision of the heart. Think about that. Do I do this or not? Let me pause. Yea or nay? Is there a grown man in here who was circumcised when he was older? Anybody? Nobody? How many of you physically? Not looking for volunteers. Don't need proof. Sorry. I knew this would be tricky. Can you imagine the pain? And all the women are going, do it. Circumcision of the heart, do you think that's any easier? Do you think that's any easier? Don't you think that there's some pain involved in being a believer in Messiah? Yeshua said, unless you suffer as I suffer, you're not my disciple. You're going to suffer for being righteous. If you're not suffering for being righteous, you're not righteous. If you look like the rest of the world, you are not walking with your God. If you fit in everywhere you go, you've got a problem. If you don't stick out like a weird dude when you go somewhere because of your God, there is an issue. Because we live in a desolate, dark, dirty, contaminated world. You're wondering, what does that have to do with all these Olah offerings? The only way at one time to approach Elohim was through an Olah, a burnt offering. Way back in the time of Abraham, that was the only kind of offering there was. The burnt offering. And in the burnt offering, back in the days of Abraham, when all you had to eat was the cattle around you and the stuff that you might buy off of traveling farmers, because there was very little, Abraham didn't plant any crops. Okay? He was a cattle, he was a rancher, he was a cowboy, in a sense, a Hebrew cowboy. He was a herdsman, wasn't he? And I think I mentioned this last week. Life was a little more critical back then. What you had to eat was a big deal. Whether or not you ate the next day was a big deal. And And so to take one of your prize bulls, because when you went to your herd to pick out an offering for your Elohim, you better not grab that little scrawny one over there that ain't getting no grass. Because Elohim, in order to get into his presence, you had to offer him the best. And when in an ancient Olah offering, a burnt offering, you had to take that offering and give every bit of it to Elohim. You didn't get to eat any of it. So you just threw away. How long does a bull last? Some of you guys know. I mean, that'll feed a lot of people for quite some time.
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
That's of course, Abraham had 300 people in his camp, so it probably wouldn't last that long, but it would last for a while. It's a big amount of money for a guy back then. If you convert the cow to keshes, to silver, it's a lot. And that was the only way you could approach God. Because Messiah had not come to die at that point. And then let me check my notes because I don't want to steer you wrong. Not sure I wrote it down. It's in Leviticus 1 through about 6 or 7 where all of the korbanot offerings are listed. And you have, and I'll read them to you right quick. You have first of all, the one we're talking about is the Olah, the burnt offering. But then in Leviticus, you have other ways that you can approach Elohim for different reasons. Okay? And one of them was the Zevach Shalamim, which is the peace offering. And I'll try to go slow, although we're running out of time. The peace offering. And then the next one would be, the way I have put them down here, is the Chatat, the sin offering. And then the Asham, which is a guilt offering. And then Mincha, which is a food and drink offering, a meal offering. And so, and then there's this strange one that's offered only at certain times in Israeli history, and we're almost there. As a matter of fact, in the 90s, one of these was bread. And then again, a little bit later, and that's the Parah Adumah, the red heifer. Okay? Which was a particular offering that was kind of strange, and Israel still today doesn't understand it. And it was for the temple, but at the same time, it was offered up for people who had been contaminated by the dead. And the funny thing is that when the people who offered up the Parah Adumah, when they were finished, they were contaminated. And they had to go and offer up a different offering in order to be cleansed from having offered up the Parah Adumah. So you had all these different types of offerings by which you could approach Elohim, but the Olah was still the one that you could not consume any of it. All of it was given to Elohim. And we see that Yisrael is instructed 5 different times to offer up. How many? About 12 or 13 Olah offerings at every feast. Over and over and over again. And again, that Olah comes from the word to ascend. And the best reason that we understand that he called it an Olah, and it's translated as burnt offering, why is it called an Olah, which means to ascend? Well, for several reasons. The most practical reason on the Peshat level, the obvious, is because smoke rises. When you burn something, the result of it goes up. And when you burn meat, and the ashes, where do they go? They go up into the air, don't they? The scent goes up into the air. It's an ascent, but it's also to elevate you. And so, I guess what I've been driving at in all of this is some of these offerings you could consume yourself. And you just have to go read those six or 7 chapters and see which ones the offerer could consume. So you and your whole family, if you brought an offering to Elohim, let's say it was a peace offering, you can bring that to Elohim, and I think the peace offering, you can consume part of that yourself. And then the rest of it, I think the priest could consume the rest of that. Okay? But the Olah was completely burned, completely offered up, given straight to God. There was no one else could partake of it. Now think about this. It's the burnt offering. I looked up a scripture. Many of you know where it is. I read it this morning almost by accident. And that was about when Messiah came to earth, died. It says that he descended into the lower regions. Right? I don't have time to do what I wanted to do today, but I think I'm going to say this. What we're studying on Monday nights is those 15 Psalms. And I think I even said this last week. Our approach to Yahweh, we offer up offerings of thanksgiving with our lips, right? We offer up praises like we did this morning. I hope you understand that when you come in here and sing, it's not just anybody can sing. Steve goes, right. Anybody can sing. But not everybody can offer it to Elohim. And really, everybody in this place is supposed to be, even if you don't sing well, guess what? You're still supposed to sing. I've tried to tell people this, that people who can't sing don't believe this, but your voice actually creates greater harmony, greater melody when you're off key. It contributes to the sound. It does, I promise you. And that's an offering to Elohim. Your prayers, when we come here at 8 o'clock and pray, we're not just waking ourselves up early to go do our civic duty. We're here offering up offerings to Elohim. Okay? When we begin our Siddur service, and it seems to some of you like rote, like, well, we do this every week. It changes week to week usually. But when we read in the Siddur, those, hopefully you're looking at those words and you're going, you know what, I agree with this. I want this to happen. Hey, Elijah comes soon, speedily, and in your day. Hallelujah. I would love to see that. Wouldn't you? Like I said, I'm tired of being human. I'm tired of this flesh. Let me make sure I've covered everything that is. Oh. Two more things, two more part of that lifelong process that I want to talk about. And I said one of these already. And that's in Isaiah, determination. So we had effort, introspection, determination to decide, this is how I'm going to live my life. And then the second part of that is what we looked at in the book of Acts, or the last part of that is having the 7 powers of the Ruach HaKodesh. Now you go, wait, there's 7? Yes, there's 7. And so if you'll turn to Isaiah 11, you'll see them very clearly. I've taught on this before. We have some new people who are just now learning how we practice our faith and what it is that we believe about the Ruach HaKodesh and the power of it and how we make ourselves obedient to it. And so when you see this menorah hopefully doesn't just stand here as some sort of cool Jewish thing, but it's a symbol of something. It's a symbol of the Ruach HaKodesh. You see that in the book of Revelation where it says that Messiah is the one who walks among the 7 lampstands. Okay, it's 7 candles, 7 lights. Okay, it's talking about the menorah. The menorah is all over the book of Revelation. It just doesn't come out that way because our Greek redactors stripped it of its Jewishness. It's a menorah. And what that is referring to, because he says he also is the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand. Remember that? What you don't realize is on where this is a cup that is just round, on the actual menorah, this was a flower. with 6 petals, and when the light would have shined down on it, there would have been 7 stars of David on the floor, because it was a lily. It was the lily on the bottom. Check it out. The bottom of the menorah was a lily. And so when the light would have shined on it, there would have been 7 stars on the floor. And Yeshua said, I'm the one. He is the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, in talking about the 7 lambs. Okay? And that's a reference to Isaiah chapter 11, because he says it's the 7, there was a menorah in front of the throne, and that is the 7 spirits of Elohim. That's what it says in Revelation. And so because people are confused by 7 spirits, they tweak your modern version to say the 7-fold Spirit of God. But you shouldn't be confused. It's a reference to Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. A staff will emerge from the root of Jesse, and a shoot will, from the stump of Jesse, and the shoot will sprout from his roots. The Ruach Yahweh, the Spirit of Yahweh, will rest upon him. The Ruach of wisdom, of understanding, of counsel, of strength, of knowledge, and the fear of Yahweh. You have 7 spirits there. And so this is a picture of Messiah. That's what messianic means. It's the anointing of the Messiah. Yahweh has given us those powers, those same powers. And you're thinking about Romans 12, and you're thinking about 1 Corinthians 12 and 14, and you're probably thinking about Ephesians 4, and you're trying to, in Romans 9, these different places in Greek Hadashah talk about what people call the gifts of the Spirit. Okay? And and you see different lists. Some people have 12, some people have 14, some people have 5, and so I'm telling you, they all roll out from these 7 things in Isaiah 11. Because when you look at Romans under this light, you see that several of what he calls, what looks like he's calling different gifts, actually come from one on the menorah. Prophecy and some of the others roll out of that one in the middle called the Council of Heads. Okay? That's a whole teaching that I don't have time to do, but what am I trying to say? Approaching Elohim is not, it's not something that is hard to do anymore. And if you're pursuing him, then the scriptures say that you're pursuing those powers. And he says, seek the greater powers, especially that you prophesy. And in the wider Christian community, everything is focused on tongues and miracles and stuff like that. Where is the prophecy? And not prophecy in the sense of abracadabra, I can tell the future. Prophecy in the sense of, this is what God's Word says. This is what His will is. This is where He wants His people going. Right? And so drawing near to Him is not... Even though these Olam offerings, those things, do you know that was a big job for Israel to get that done every year? Think about that. And on top of that, on Sukkot, then you had these 70 bulls you had to offer at Sukkot as well. There were a lot of animals being offered during Sukkot. So approaching Elohim and making sure that Israel was pleased was a lot. There was a lot to go through. The beautiful thing about it is Messiah has done all of that for us when He approached the hill. When He laid down on that tree and they executed Him. When He shed His blood. And the whole point of Him doing that is not for you to sit in the background. It's not for you to sit out there away from Elohim. And understand, when I say away, I'm not talking about backsliding. I'm not talking about turning around and walking away from Him. I'm talking about drifting out into the crowd and maybe even outside the gates, and you're out here and you're just doing your worldly thing. You still know God, but you're not close to Him. Is anybody there right now? I'm free to care to admit it. Week after week we come in here and the whole idea is to bring you closer. And I'll just say this. You say, well, how will I know if I ever get into the Holy of Holies? You're going to know. You're going to know. And the thing is let's think about people in Yeshua's day who got there in a spiritual sense. The first one that comes to mind is that woman who shed blood for 12 years and crawled on her hands and knees to touch his tzitzit so that she could be healed. I'd say she got there. She understood the mercy of God. She understood all I got to do is get near him and touch him. That's all I have to do. That's it. And there was a time in my life, and I've said this before, Melanie knows this is true, when I got to that point because I had a sore throat that was choking me off. I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink, I couldn't do anything. It was closed off. I could barely breathe. And I said, I can't take this anymore. And I got down on my knees and I started thinking of that woman. I said, I don't care what I have to go through spiritually. I want to get there. And I just started singing, and my throat just opened up, and all those open sores just went away. I heard it crackling like Rice Krispies in there. And it went away. I have 2 witnesses. I think Betsy might remember it. And I'm not saying that to be proud of myself. I'm saying that because the same Lord I went through is available to everybody in this room. The same power that raised Messiah Yeshua from the dead, if you believe in him and have confessed faith in his blood, it is in you. Only you know whether your faith is genuine. But if it is genuine, then the same power that raised Messiah from the dead lives in you right now. Quit seeking it out there. Quit seeking it from the next would-be prophet. Reading the next book. There's only one book you need. That's it. Effort, introspection, determination, and the powers of the Ruach. I can't wait myself until everybody in this place, because that was what was different about those 500 Jews 2,000 years ago. It says they were assembled all together in a single place, Yam Yachad, in one mind. They had a single determination. They all had their mind fixed on the words of Messiah Yeshua and on the promise of his Ruach. And if ever we can herd these cats enough in here into that same kind of mindset and get everybody interested in having the power of the Ruach moving in their life, meeting your needs. And the beautiful thing is I'm hearing it in spots. I'm hearing, and Paul Alvarado is not here. He's in San Antonio, but he visited a few weeks ago, and I prayed for him like a year and a half ago, and he left, and he came back about to pee his pants. I forgot to tell you. You prayed for my back a year and a half ago. I was about to have back surgery. Do you remember? And I said, yeah, he was going to have that titanium stuff put in his spine to lift his back up. He's a big boy. And he came up for prayer, and I prayed for him. He just wanted to pray that the surgery would go well. And I said, well, let's have a different surgery. And I prayed that God would heal him. And he went to the doctor, prepared for the pain went away that day, he said. But he told me, he said, 6 weeks later, I went to the doctor just to make sure. And he said, it's gone. And I'm seeing that in spots. I'm hearing different people in the congregation saying, this is what God has done for me. This is what's going on in my life. And I'm hearing it. And what has to happen is that everybody in here has to recognize that we are on this earth for a reason. And it's to bring the glory of Messiah into ourselves so that we can show it to the world. That's why we're here. And if you're not pursuing that, you're wasting your life. You're throwing away the reason you were put on earth. People are seeking purpose in life. What is your purpose? To glorify God. I'd be here all day. Mark? Matt? We've got a lot going on in this congregation, and a lot of it is very exciting, and it's clear, it's obvious to me that Yahweh is on our side. There's just no doubt. And there have been times when I've wondered, you know, and it's in spite of me, and it's in spite of the big game, and it's in spite of everybody in this place, you know, in spite of Hasatan trying to wreck it, Yahweh is up to something. He's doing something. He has a reason for it. And if you have been wondering about why am I on this earth? What is the purpose of my life? I just told you what it is. And how He uses you in that is beyond my comprehension. You know, you young folks who are trying to make a decision about what career to use. Well, I'll tell you what, if you'll set your mind on serving Elohim, He will bust the doors open for your career. And it will be what you thought. Page 99. This is the time for prayer. If you have a need,